All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Self-Care and its Radical Roots panel. We're so happy you guys could all make it tonight. We're going to go ahead and get started with the panel and do some introductions. So I'm going to start us off. My name is Abigail Watkins.
My name is Jackson Polk.
My name is Charlotte Exo.
I'm Neil Bennett.
Caroline Phillips.
All right. Okay, and today, again, we are using our GC2Y class, Sex and Resistance, Professor Sevchik, with a service learning collaboration with the Women's Center here on campus. The purpose of our event is to discuss the history of radical self-care and its origins, how self-care has changed in the modern age, and the misconceptions about self-care and how it can impact your life through incorporating it into everyday life and the workplace. We want to overall dismantle the preconceptions about what self-care is, especially for those who may not think self-care is beneficial to them, and show them how it can be incorporated into your everyday life.
So we're going to hear from a couple panelists today. Stephanie Opperman, who is an associate professor here at GCSU, specializing in world history. Michael Hobbs, who is a lecturer here at GCSU, specializing in exercise science. Dr. Stephanie McClure, who is professor of sociology here at GCSU. And if y'all have anything to add, feel free and I'll say anything. If not, if you have any questions, put them in the chat for the panelists to answer for the Q&A at the end of the discussion.
To kind of get us started before we went into the panelists talking, I was going to talk for a few minutes about what radical self-care means, what it is, and how it's different from modern self-care. So when you look at radical self-care from self-care, you've got radical in front of it, obviously. Radical actually comes from the Latin of radicalis, which means root. It was the earliest uses were back into the 14th century, and it was used to talk about the roots of trees, but on a metaphorical level, you could see it as the root of about anything. So that's how you start to see how it could tie into self-care. Moving into when self-care started to come around, the ideology of it started in the 1950s. It was more so in the medical community in a psychiatric setting. It was kind of used by doctors to kind of talk about the mental state of people and how to take care of yourself and your own mental state. It shifted a little bit more. You move the timeline down 10 years to the 60s, you start to see the Black Panther Party and the civil rights movement and how they all tied in. And it went from a self-care perspective to more of a community care, whether it be race, gender, just any type of marginalized community that's there. We're like focused on community care and banding together, which I'll talk about in a minute, but banding together with like-minded individuals to kind of make sure that you were in a good setting and a good environment for not only your physical, but your mental health as well. And that's kind of how it's evolved to today's society, is kind of seen as, you know, self-care from a perspective of who you surround yourself with. And I learned a lot about that through listening to a talk from Tiffany Borglin. She's a self-care activist, and she talked about different ways and different groups you need to look at. She went through family, she went through friends, and different organizational ties that you may have in your life, and how a short-term versus long-term approach to self-care could make a massive difference. You look at short-term approaches, say you go on an afternoon walk, maybe you go on a shopping spree, whatever it is, something that's, you know, might take an hour or two out of your day to make yourself feel better. That may only last for the rest of that day, maybe the rest of the week, but on a long-term approach, is that solving the problem? And usually the case is that it's not. And that's when radical self-care comes in. You look back to the Latin of where radical came from, and it's getting down to the root of it. You have to get down to the root of whatever the issue is that could be causing the problem in your life. And she talked about those family, friends, and organizational ties. And usually when you get down to the root, a little bit deeper meanings of finding the problem, it's not so sweet there. You know, it's not easy, and it's not something that most people want to do. But whether it be, you know, cutting those ties or making sure you're surrounding yourself with a different group of people who are more like-minded and are more focused on your well-being than others, that could be more of a long-term approach. And that's where radical self-care stems from, is taking, you know, not taking the hour or two out of the day, maybe looking at it from a wider lens and seeing what can you do to really solve the problem at the end of the day and work out best for your mental health in the long term. So that's kind of a history on radical self-care and how it was, you know, came to be and was changed into what it is today. Jackson will lead us off in the questions for the panelists. We have our first one coming from Jackson.
Thank you, Neil. So our first question for our panelists is, what does self-care mean to you? And what are some examples of self-care? Dr. McClure, would you like to start us off with your answer?
I think I'd actually like to hear from my other panelists first, if you don't mind, just based on what we talked about before we got started today.
Okay. Anyone can speak up if they'd like to
Yeah, I'm happy to start. I'll say that, I think there's two components to self-care. One is this idea of, sort of self-restoration when your energy gets down and you need to sort of build that back up. And that can happen in lots of different ways that I know we're going to talk about. But in addition to just sort of the, refueling yourself and getting ready for what's next, I think the other component is self-acceptance and just really coming to terms with, feeling empowered again. A lot of times when people are involved in activism, they have a lot of toxicity that's coming their way and they can hear a lot of negativity. And so being able to step away from that and, just really come back into who they are and feel that sense of empowerment in knowing who they are and not being told who they are, but being able to express that outward, sort of finding a way to have both of those. So you are sort of restoring your energy, but you're also just getting a new level of self-acceptance away from a lot of negative criticism that helps empower you and get ready for whatever is next.
So I guess I'm next. So for me, self-care is about, I think, controlling the things that you can control and not focusing on the things that you can't control. Most of the things in our life are well beyond what we can control. And when you focus on those things, then I think your life spirals out of control, or it appears to. So focusing on things like, obviously my background is exercise science. So focusing on your ability to move, right? In whatever facet or in whatever manner that you deem best for you. Thinking about how to control the food that goes into your body, controlling the amount of sleep that you get, things like spending time with your tribe or those that you feel close to, right? Like things like that. Trying to be mindful in the moment and focus on the moment, right? And not thinking about the future or thinking about the past, because the future may never come and the past may never, and the past is already gone. And so focusing on this moment, making sure that we have, like Neil had talked about, like strong social ties, because, as humans, we are by our nature very social creatures, and that's something that you can't extricate from us. You can't take that away from us. I think the pandemic showed that when we isolated ourselves, it wasn't the best thing for most of our health. And then kind of things like, returning to nature and being in those kind of natural environments. And so to me, like self-care is doing those things, and I don't know, remaining in those kinds of places. And that's kind of, I don't know, to the best of my ability, I don't know, to articulate what I think self-care would be about.
So I'd say my definitions probably fit those two. Definitely relinquishing, I think what Michael said about relinquishing control of the things that you can't control. That's really important for me. And then thinking about how to make modifications in my life, for, as Stephanie said, to kind of make long-term improvements overall. So one thing that I've done recently is that I bought a house that was closer to town so that I can walk to campus every day. And I have to say that has made a pretty dramatic change in my overall well-being. Being able to walk back and forth and building in a walk as part of my day feels like to me has been a pretty transformative structural change in the way that my day-to-day life is organized that helps me to feel better over the long term. So I would say that that's something that was, it was within my control, although it wasn't necessarily something I was aware of that would have as big of a difference, an impact as it has. But that is something that's, like Neil said, it's one part of my day, but it's every day. So that built into the structure, I think, makes a big difference.
Okay, did anyone else want to chime in on that? Anything else to add? Okay, well, if not, thank you so much for your answers. Our next question is, how has self-care benefited your life? And what are some examples of self-care in your life that you find the most beneficial? And if it overlaps with your previous answer, that is okay.
Well, since I gave kind of a big picture answer for the first one, I'll give some more specifics this go around. I will say that, you know, through the pandemic and also just through life, I think a lot of us are experiencing burnout, and we've had lots and lots of time inside our heads when we're maybe not necessarily around other people. And so, you know, just really taking time to pause and, you know, have a sense of presence and mindfulness, which I know we were just talking about with Michael. For me, that is my 5-year-old daughter. She does a beautiful job of like, hey, I'm over here and I want to see you. And I know you think you want to check your work email right now, but we're going to play with balloons. And that's just what's happening. Or we're going to run around outside right now and nope, you got to put down your thing because we're doing hula hoops. And that's really a good way to get me sort of out of my head and out of my house and into the present moment with someone who is so excited to see me and wants my attention. And so that's, you know, that's one way. Finding community and having people that you can, you know, vent with, and, you know, you have enough in common that, you know, you can shorthand it, you know, with some of them, that makes a really big difference. I would also like to normalize going to therapy. It is amazing for those of you, you know, who have access to it and or, you know, have found an online option for it or are taking advantage of the things on campus. That is just such a wonderful, wonderful tool. And then the last thing I'll say is, you know, just really looking for moments of quiet time. I'm the kind of person that, you know, really, I love like going full throttle with my kiddo. I love really getting engaged in discussion when I'm in the classroom. I love like spending time with my husband and my family and my friends. And also that really requires just having a space, any space, just to like, even if it's a closet, just to like sit somewhere and be quiet for a little bit is amazingly recharging for me.
All right. I think I'm going to go next again. So the first thing, how has self-care benefited your life? So I will be very candid, very transparent. For a lot of my life, I didn't like myself, and I definitely didn't love myself at all, which was really weird. I won't, you know, a lot of people who know me would be like, you know, because I could be really arrogant and then at times be really beat myself over the head with kind of a club kind of thing. But one thing I've learned to do with self-care is learn to like myself and even learn to love myself and definitely learn to forgive myself. So those have been really, really powerful things that some of my self-care has gone into a lot of reading and talking to people that are a lot more intelligent than me about things like that. So some examples, obviously, of things that I've done, and I'll go back kind of to my background, is one of the first things that I learned to do was that I needed to move on a regular basis, and it needed to have variety in it. I think that's one of the things a lot of times we miss is we think movement is me being on the treadmill 5 days a week at the gym. And I think that you're missing the variety when you do that, and you're missing the outdoors, which is obviously something I'm very, very big into biophilia. But I think movement and different kinds of movement and movement that you enjoy, it doesn't, just because everybody runs, if you don't enjoy running, maybe it's you don't have to be a runner. Maybe you're swimming, or maybe you're biking, or maybe you're just hiking, or maybe you're walking. I think walking is incredibly powerful, and people dismiss it like, oh, it's a walk, but man, you don't know the power of a walk then if you just dismiss it in that manner. So I think that's incredibly powerful. I'm a big gardener. I have a farm, and so I spend a lot of time with plants. So that gives me a lot of quiet time when I kind of remove myself from school and people and stuff. One of the most powerful things, and I've changed my diet, and I could talk about my sleep and stuff, but I think one of the most powerful things that I've found, especially in the last 6 months to a year, probably a year, but maybe the most 6 months, is being really aware and being mindful and being focused on the moment. I think Dr. Opperman did an amazing job of talking about her child. I don't have a child or an SO or anything like that, but what I do have is a menagerie of animals. And so one thing I've learned is, and even over the break, even during the pandemic, I watched my chickens, and like, they didn't care about anything was going on, and my dogs or my cats, they didn't care about anything was going on but that moment, and they focused on the moment, and they lived in that moment, and they loved that moment. I take my dogs on a walk every morning and every afternoon, and it's the same kind of route, and we do the same, but every morning there, and it's like it's a brand new adventure every single morning and every single day. My chickens scratch around, and it's this brand new moment, and they're incredibly excited, and you're like, how could you be so excited? It's because this is really famous saying, like, a person never crosses the same river twice, because you're not the same person, and it's never the same river. And to them, that I think the animals realize that, they focus on that moment. They're like, no, I'm not the same, and this moment isn't the same, this tree isn't the same, or this path isn't the same. And I think for me, because I think in these patterns, and you get a sense of boredom, and you're like, it's the same thing every day, I'm doing these things, and but trying to live more in the moment by, I don't know, being more like my animals, I think has been an amazing discovery for me in the last year. So that's it.
I love that. Movement is so important. I think I struggle with some chronic pain. I have it's undiagnosed, what's in my family, fibromyalgia syndrome. So I can't not move, or else I just have pain all the time. Then I can't sleep. And then the pain, it becomes a self-reinforcing cycle. So, but when I will say, kind of related to, I'll share, I kind of misunderstood the assignment. So I messed up a little bit, and they're going to be nice enough to let me give you the presentation that I prepared. But it was partly actually because as I reflected on the things that I would identify as self-care in my own practice, a lot of them actually are around consumption. So I have a Peloton, and I got it during the pandemic, and it does have a lot of variety. Just spinning is not good. The variety does make a difference. And it's super capitalist. And I started following some of the teachers on Instagram, and they all look like they have body dysmorphic disorders. So it makes me like it less, which is very frustrating. But that Peloton feeds me. Oh my God, I love it. She's my best friend. She's downstairs, and we do a lot of Doja Cat, and it is amazing. And it makes me feel like I'm lit up with light on the inside. And I, over the pandemic, recommitted to a meditation practice. And I've been doing yoga for a really long time, but I decided to get certified to teach yoga, which might have been a mistake, because then teaching takes away from the stress relief part, but I'm a teacher at heart, so I couldn't. And meditation, and actually learning particularly about the 8 limbs of yoga in terms of aparigraha, non-grasping, and being able to let go of what you can't control, has been transformative for me. But also, I do spend money on it. There's a lot of money that's spent related to that yoga practice, which I also love. And in sociology, it's also connected with questions of cultural appropriation, which I have to, kind of critically engage with as an individual person and as a sociologist. And then something that I did a few years ago that I still am embarrassed to admit to my students, but it's not a lie, but that will come up in the presentation that I've prepared for you all, is that there is a lady named Pam who comes to clean my house every 2 weeks, and it is awesome. And I'm really embarrassed because I come from a very working class background and feel super bougie, and I'm so uncomfortable with having her do it, but it's every time she comes, I'm like, oh, I love you so much. Thank you so much. Because I have some obsessive behaviors about being able to relax. I can't sit down if something's not clean. So it was causing a lot of stress because I wouldn't be able to use my downtime at all because I was always cleaning. And so I spent money that I have to buy time and therapeutic intervention. I love all of those things, and they have been transformative for me, and they are definitely a part of my self-care, but they do caused me to ask some critical questions about my relative privilege to be able to consume those things. So I want to tell you the truth. I'm a huge believer in just meditation. Like the way I started my meditation practice is you just set a timer for 5 minutes and you just breathe. And I really think if the whole world meditated for 5 minutes every day, a lot of peace would be added to the universe. I know that sounds like a really hokey thing to say, but I'm a very big believer in that. So that's my answer.
Thank you. That was good. Our next question, how can self-care help college students and faculty? Where can students go on campus to get more information about self-care? So Stephanie Opperman, will you start?
All right. Well, I can speak to the first part of the question more, but I will say that, exhaustion to me is a sense that you've neglected your well-being. And so doing what you can to acknowledge that you are exhausted, that that leads to it being hard to focus, that it can be hard to respond to things and hard to get your work done, that's a sign in part that you're probably neglecting other areas too, right? You're not eating enough or eating regularly, you're not hydrated enough, you're not moving enough. And so I think making adjustments to that and listening to your body. I hear, so many of us say like, oh, I'm exhausted. And that's absolutely true. And I think there are these other components that are there with it. So the more of those that you can, do something about, again, like Michael was saying, with food and sleep and movement, that can just help everybody, particularly on, college campuses, particularly as we reach the end of the semester. And then I'll also add that, itself really, part of it for me is about reflection on being able to confirm or sort of adjust what your ideals are, what you want out of life, what it is that you're working for. Are you still excited about this thing that you're working for, or are you just running yourself into the ground for no reason, or because someone else told you to? That's not going to be good long-term motivation. So, just really checking in with yourself and figuring out, sort of what is important to you is something that we could all, I think, regularly do more. And then, sort of speaking to what Dr. McClure was just saying, or Stephanie, self-care also, I read somewhere that like it's more about a willingness than it is about your finances. So as long as you're willing to do something, there are options for you out there. And yes, as we have our finances and we can explore lots of opportunities, there are wonderful ways to indulge and to treat ourselves, right? Like I would love to get a massage every day. There could just be like a masseuse who comes out of a closet and like, yay. And I would not mind that at all. My shoulders would love that. But, the practicality is that I'm more often likely to meditate or to go for a walk or something like that. And so I think that, it is something that is accessible to everyone. I'm also just remembering, hearing Angela Davis talk about starting yoga while she was in prison, right? That like it took being in prison for her to like calm down, settle down enough, give herself time to reflect. And then she started the daily yoga practice there. So I think, making sure that we normalize self-care, that we talk about how it is accessible for everyone and how we check in with ourselves and with each other about forms of exhaustion, all kind of build towards ways that they could help us as a college community.
So how can it not help college students and faculty, right? Like, so we're no different than all the other primates on the planet, as I like to say, like, and there's probably knowing that it cannot help. I think a lot of us maybe are, I don't know, sometimes I think when I was in college, I would have laughed at someone like, whatever, I'll just take care of this, or maybe I should just suck it up and things like that. But I had a very different view on those things. It's kind of from the background I kind of grew up on and stuff like that. One of the things that I have made in my to do in several of my classes in my GC2Y. We read a book, it's called Go Wild, and we talk about like kind of 6 facets of ways, things that you should kind of do, things that I kind of talked about that are really helpful for someone. And I hope, especially as freshmen, there are things that they're maybe not introduced to, like I talked about, like getting enough sleep, and what is your diet like, and what is your movement like, and how is your social, how's your tribe, and being mindful and being around nature and stuff like that. And so, but also in the biochemistry I teach, I'm as a kind of a side thing, I make them read this book called Spark that's all about how movement helps things like your anxiety or your stress or your depression or your ADHD or hormonal issues and things like that, and how those things kind of been shown. And so I hope that where on campus can you go? I don't know specifically, but I hope that students would feel like they could approach like their professors or their instructors and stuff, and that we would be able to at least tell them something that they should do. Because in all candor, I don't know where on campus that they would literally go to get that information. I hope that my students would know that they could talk to me about some of those things. So, but I don't know. And so maybe that's something to note, is like, maybe that's something they should be introduced to, because there's no way that they're not going to have problems or issues or self-doubt or be depressed or as incredibly anxious or stressed out. There's no way, because they're just people. And so, yeah, that's all I have to say about that.
Through the end of this month, on Tuesday at 5:45 at the Hancock branch of the public library, Dr. McClure teaches the free restorative yoga class. It's for free. It's for free. It doesn't cost any money. You can come and it's awesome. And we breathe and we rest and it's amazing. So I could tell you right there, that's a resource. I also think that the cultural norms of the college campus, particularly in finals week, it gets turned up on 11, valorize exhaustion as if that's evidence of work. And so my students will say, well, I didn't even go home. I spent all night in the library and I was studying for like 7 hours. And I'm like, that is stupid. That is stupid, not admirable. Cognitively, your brain won't function. Take a nap, take a walk, and eat some vegetables, right? You can only absorb so much information. And there is a lot of like peer culture. And then we have midnight breakfast and then pizza at 2 in the morning in the dorms. It's nonsensical. You should not be up eating breakfast at midnight. Go to bed. It doesn't make any sense. And so I don't participate in that. And then, yeah, students go and they're like, well, I spent 6 hours studying with a group in the library. No, you didn't. You spent 6 hours with a group in the library, but there wasn't studying. Half the time you were anxious because Caroline was talking about all the things she knows that you don't know, and you were freaking out because you're not even ready. And then because you were freaking out, you got on Instagram instead of paying attention to anything. It's nonsensical, right? So it's like you've created this story that if I'm exhausted, then I'm working, and that is not accurate. You can work more effectively and efficiently. Go outside, go be by yourself. I'm just repeating what the other folks have already said. I apologize, but like I hardcore agree with that.
Our next question is, what are some tips on establishing good habits within self-care?
It's discipline. You have to define it as something that's valuable. You have to trust what other people are saying to you, and you have to sort of say, this Matt. I mean, I really do think that, like one of my favorite Peloton teachers says, discipline steps in when motivation fails. And I love that. Like it is, if you just say, this is what I'm doing because I know this is what is right. You build in, I really am a big believer. I like what Michael said about variety. I can't do the same thing every day. I'll just lose my mind. And I can't run. My thighs are too big. My body mechanics are jacked for running. Like everything goes wrong. So I have to find other things that I can do to make it work. So variety is important. There used to be at Bodyplex, there was this old lady dance party called Body Jam. And I love to dance. There's not nearly enough places. We don't do enough dancing in our culture, in my opinion. Music is amazing. Music is medicine, and movement is medicine. Those are two of my mantras. And so you have to define it as valuable. And then you have to not act like those 6 hours studying in the library was work. And so you didn't have time to go do a workout, right? because you weren't working for 6 hours, that's a lie. And then B, if you did the workout, you could study for 2 hours and you'd be a lot more productive. And so you have to like, partly you kind of have to like big brain yourself out of the bad behaviors and say, this is what we know is true, so do the thing. That's what I think.
Okay, I'll go. So for me, number one, start simple. Like, don't try to change 17 things about yourself all at once, because what's likely to happen is you'll change 0 and you'll just reinforce other habits, and then you'll tell yourself that you can't do it and you'll be less likely to start it again. I think some of the wisest advice I got was, look, find your lever, find one thing that you can change or that you're willing to change, let's say, right? I'm just going to make an example, right? Kind of instantiate it. So like, I'm just make this up, run 4 days a week. And then, so I start to do that, right? And I start to feel a little bit better. And then I maybe start to change some things in my diet, right? Like I start to eat more of this, and then that allows me to sleep better maybe. And then I start maybe having better positive social, let's say social outings. Then maybe I start to say, all right, well, let's do these things outside. Then my anxiety is lessened, so I'm able to be more mindful, right? And it's kind of finding a lever so you can get to the next thing and the next thing, and then kind of build yourself up to, doing all those things. But I think if you try to do it all at once, which is admirable, right? Like, I want to change everything. Like, I've been there, but I failed miraculously, right? And it's not about doing that. It's really hard to change a habit, let alone 47 habits. So start small and celebrate your victories, and be like, hell yeah, I ran 5 days this week or 3 days this week, or I didn't eat pizza at all this, or whatever, right? Like whatever, or I meditated for 5 minutes every day this week. Man, that'd be awesome. I mean, I wish I would have done that when I was, some of your ages, because I definitely did not. I thought meditation was a joke till, a few years ago. I just thought it was something to laugh about, because I tried it and I failed miraculously at it. And I was like, my brain won't stop spinning, so my little hamster's just running on his wheel. It won't stop. So that's what I would say.
Well, and those are both fabulous answers, and I agree with everything. So I'm gonna let those two speak for it.
All right, thank you all for your answers in that one. And our last question before we move on to Dr. McClure's presentation is, how do you incorporate self-care into your specific fields?
Well, I'll start with this one. So I'm a history professor. There is a lot of written record of people taking care of themselves and how that helps, and people not taking care of themselves and how that is to their detriment. For me personally, though, I will say that, I teach Latin American history. I teach US Latin American relations. I teach a lot of classes on immigration and the southern border and, diplomacy. And these are all, politically charged classes. There's a lot of, difficult conversations that happen in there. I want to try to be fair and balance a lot of different points of views and make sure that there's space for all kinds of voices and for representation from all kinds of different groups. And that's a really tough gig. That's something that I have to be very mindful about and careful of, and sort of maintain a really strong sense of purpose in order to, kind of get motivated every time. And so, within my field, I definitely, I can look to, I can look to elders. I can also sort of look at the, sort of historical trajectory of knowing that everyone who's tried to have a difficult conversation has had to have this in some form. And then, just talking to my peers, building a sense of community, and really trying to, engage with the students too, and not be the, like lecturer on the stage, but actually like interact with folks and make it more about, commonalities and empathy, and sort of let let bridges form instead of, again, me just sort of throwing a bunch of content out there and hoping somebody catches it somehow. It's kind of wandering, but those are some of my thoughts on that.
Okay. I think for my field, it's relatively evident. Obviously, one of the things that I promote is movement, a lot of movement, variety in movement. One of the things that the class I teach, exercise biochemistry, has also allowed me to do is also promote certain eating habits, how to, if one was looking to, let's say, be the best mover one could be, right? How would one fuel oneself and things like that? What are, if we want to be, let's say at our peak when we're moving, what kind of vitamins we want to have in certain amounts, and why are B vitamins actually really important, or vitamin D, and so on and so forth. So for me in my field, it's really easy to incorporate self-care. I guess I've never called it self-care. I never titled it that way. But the reason I brought Spark into it was because I felt like, look, this helped me become a better person, and finally learn to appreciate myself or like myself and things like that. I can't be the only person that feels that way about those things. There have to be other people, students probably too, that were, for similar backgrounds or maybe different backgrounds, but went through similar things, and, are sitting too much, or have lots of anxiety or ADHD, or have depression. And this is something that could help them. I don't believe it's a cure-all. I don't think that if everybody goes for a run every day, all of a sudden it's going to be rainbows and lollipops. Like, that's not what I believe. But I do believe that you don't really know where your baseline is until you start moving. You don't really know where your baseline is until you start getting sleep. You don't know where your baseline is until you get a decent diet, or you have positive social environment and positive social interactions, and you're outside some and things like that. So I've tried to incorporate that into my fields and into all my classes and stuff, to relay those messages, because I never got any of that stuff told to me when I was in high school, or even after high school, or even in college. No one told me those things. I found out reading books and doing stuff as a 30-plus-year-old man, when I was going through major depression and stuff like that, wondering, like, how can I get myself out of this? I've been in this way forever. I have to change something. And so you start seeking stuff and you find some stuff. And luckily I met, it's like the universe smiled upon me, and some people pointed me in the right direction, and I found some things. And so I wanted to share those things with the students. And so I try to incorporate it in the form of, mandatory assignments sometimes, or making it part of what I call my C&Ds, or our discussions with pathologies and stuff like that, and showing them how those things could have really negative, like really, really, really deleterious, or really, really salubrious effects, depending on like how you weigh those things in your life. So, yeah.
So I think this is where I can share what I prepared, which was a little bit not totally understanding the assignment, but I did want to say my yoga teaching and my sociology teaching are very much the same. I figured that out as I was going through my yoga teacher certification. A lot of the way that I approach teaching sociology is about helping students to loosen their grip, to stop grasping so tightly, to hold on to stories and ideas and mythologies and misperceptions they have about reality, let go of some of those things, and maybe see that another world is possible. One of my favorite quotes that I've had on my wall forever, I think I meant to go grab it. I think it's Krishnamacharya, but I might not be saying the name right. But the quote is, "It is no measure of good health to be well adjusted to a sick society." I think that's really important to understand. And so in my sociology teaching, it is partly to help students see that what is could be other. And that is true, in terms of the stories that we tell about ourselves and who we are and where we fit, and then also about the world that we inhabit. And so calling students' attention to what is true, it isn't always easy. I was actually talking with some colleagues about this last week at a conference. The paradox of teaching sociology is that it makes you feel powerless in the face of massive structures, but it also makes you feel empowered because now you know, and you cannot solve problems you inaccurately diagnose. I genuinely believe that you have to have the correct information. So I'm going to see if I can do this, get this figured out in the right way. I've done it before so that you can just see my slides, but I can still look at my notes. Because I'm using the brilliance of some other people to help me talk to you a little bit about this. So there we go. So can you all see the slides? Thumbs up.
We can.
Yes. So when we think about, we talk about self-care, but as I said, as I reflected on the kinds of things that I do, that I identify as self-care, partly they are connected to what we call care work or reproductive labor, which is the work that's necessary to raise and protect and socialize the next generation, and also to care for the aging generation, which is essential, necessary work for human societies over time and place, but has historically been provided largely by women in the context of families in the unpaid labor market, who are often economically punished for doing that work. And so, for example, if we look at the distribution of access to leisure, this is just from a UK survey, but I tried to find the chart that was the most parsimonious because the data is similar across location and across time. Generally, men have more leisure time in their day-to-day lives than women do, but a lot of this is explained by parenthood, men and women who are parents versus, so differences in if you're a mom versus if you're a dad, let's say in heterosexual couples. But it's also interestingly connected to gender differences in sibling responsibility for elder care, which is an increasing concern. So if you have adult brothers and sisters, and then you have, you know, increasing life expectancy, increasing responsibility for elder care in a society that doesn't necessarily value that and hasn't created great structures to provide it, adult sisters tend to bear a disproportionate burden for elder care as compared to adult brothers. So I always tell my students in my classes, if you are a brother and you have a sister, help her out as that happens, because it's not cool, right? This is connected with Arlie Hochschild's work in the second shift, where she talks about that we are in a stalled revolution. Women have gone into the workforce. That was the revolution. But the workforce they go into and the men they come home to have not changed, nor has the government that could give them policies that would ease the way, like paid parental leave, paid family medical leave, or subsidized childcare. So that is a sort of stall. What's happening to men, what's happening to the workplace, and missing government help. And what often happens, right, as women, as I said, women of privilege like myself pursue self-care and seek to reduce the burden of the second shift, is that they seek out that balance through the marketplace. They go to purchase it. Barbara Rissman did research where she recruited couples, heterosexual couples, who self-nominated and said that they thought they had a gender egalitarian division of labor in their home, and then they had to do a time diary. And what she found was, these were all couples who said, we are dividing it equally. Less than 10% of them actually did divide it equally when they gathered the data. And the ones who had achieved equality all had achieved equality because none of that, they weren't doing any of it. They were paying someone else to do all of it. So it was basically, they were achieving equality through hired help. And so if we look, this is some data from the Georgia Budget and Policy Institute that looks at the top 10 occupations for women. You all can read, so you can see that, right? And this is really cool. One of my former students was working for GBPI. So I saw this chart in a presentation. I said, can you have the person who made this chart add the line for where the living wage is? And you can see that that's where that line is in the middle. Can you all see that? Is it visible on your screen? So you can see, if you just look at those titles, right, how the racial composition of basically self-care, care work, food prep and serving, home health aides, hairdresser, stylist, cosmetologists, right, retail sales, maids and house cleaners. The racial composition of those job categories is, you know, disproportionately women of color who are working at below the living wage in terms of their occupations. And this is how, right, the importance of considering intersectionality and how poverty wages are associated with what we call pink collar jobs. And this was really revealed pretty powerfully in a photo essay that appeared in Oprah magazine. What Pierre Hondagny-Sotelo writes about specifically women of privilege who pay for domestic labor. She writes, by subcontracting to private domestic workers, these women purchase release from their gender subordination in the home, effectively transferring their domestic responsibilities to other women who are distinct and subordinate by race and class, and now also made subordinate through language, nationality, and citizenship status. The work performed by Latina, Caribbean, and Filipina immigrant women today subsidizes the work of more privileged women, freeing the latter to join the productive labor force by taking jobs in business and the profession, or perhaps enabling wealthier women to become more active consumers and volunteers and to spend more time culturally grooming their children and orchestrating family recreation. Consequently, male privilege within homes and families remains uncontested and intact, and new inequalities are formed. What I love about Hondagny-Sotelo's book is that she says she was actually writing as a academic. She's a professor in California, and she was the child of a immigrant woman who worked in domestic labor. And she's like, the answer is not for us to not consume or have these job categories, but to treat them as jobs, to recognize that care work is work. It's essential and necessary work. Women are not naturally good at it because we have a uterus. And we deserve to be recognized for that work because the society really needs it, right? And so what we need is to increase the attention to the quality of these jobs. And for me, this is about paying attention to, I think Dr. Opperman mentioned it at the beginning, if we're all exhausted, maybe the conditions of the world that we've created together are not great. And maybe the solution is to do all of the things that we've already talked about in today's session. And then also to say, let's try to create a society where people are less exhausted. So what can we do to take care of ourselves so that we have the capacity to build better collectively? And that is the question that I would sort of ask, right? To bring us back to, it's no measure of good health to be well adjusted to a sick society. Thank you for letting me share those slides, even though I clearly didn't understand the assignment.
Thank you so much for making that presentation. You went way more into depth than I was expecting. That was wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and move over to our Q&A. So feel free to put any questions that you have in the chat. One question that we thought about was, is there anything you wish you had known about self-care before starting to incorporate it into your life and career? Anyone can take that question.
All right, I'll go. So I think you can't, and like many things in life, let's say, this is kind of ubiquitous, but like, it's not a destination, it's a journey, right? It's something that you're going to do until you cease to be, right? Like it's not something that you're just like I think when I was going through my stuff, I was looking to get to a place and be fixed kind of, or be well, right? And like, oh, here it is, right? My, proverbial rainbows and lollipops, and it's all better and everything's done. But it doesn't work that way. You're always changing and the world's always changing. And that's the only thing that's constant is change, right? And so you're going to do it in perpetuity, right? Until you cease to be. And it's something you've always got to work on. And it shouldn't seem like a job, but it's like, oh my gosh, I have to work on myself today. But like, you're going to have to do that. Like, you're going to have to take care of yourself today. You're going to have to, right? Like, just like you have to eat or bathe or do like any of those, like you're going to have to do that stuff to take care of yourself. You're going to have to move today, and you're going to have to sleep today, and those kinds of things. So it's a journey, dog. It is not a destination. And so, yeah, anyway.
No, I completely agree. And I will just add on that I am, what was my thought? Oh, that Nope, it's gone again. Wow, that's exciting. Twice. Okay. It's a journey. It's not a destination. Oh, it's not optional. I mean, people think that it is in the sense of like, well, maybe I will add this into my life, but it's not really how it works. Your life is going to be harder until you add this in. And I think that that's really, a good add-on to this, like journey, not a destination. It's also like doing it helps, but not doing it hurts. It's not like it's just neutral and then you can add in the help. Not doing it hurts. That's what I'm trying to say.
I love that. That specifically reminds me of one of the quotes from one of my favorite quotes from a yoga teacher, which was saying you're not flexible enough to do yoga is like saying you're too dirty to shower. It doesn't make any sense. It's nonsensical. And like, if you don't take care of your health, you will take care of your illness. I really do believe that. That is exactly right. If you don't do it, you will cease to be able to do all the other things you want to do.
I see a question from Dr. Sevchek in the chat. She says, specifically for Dr. Opperman, do you have any examples of radical self-care from other parts of the world that look a little different than the American context?
Yeah, I was thinking about, there's an organization called Casa La Serena in Oaxaca. And so it's like the Serene House. And it is specifically for women in Mexico and in Central America who, pointing to a lot of things that Stephanie McClure was talking about, who have these sort of precarious situations at home where, they're not making a salary, they may not have healthcare, they may not have access to childcare, and yet they are still like on the front lines trying to make changes in their societies. And that comes with a lot of risks, right? And a lot of fear of being attacked. There's a huge stress level that comes in that environment. And so Casa La Serena invites women to come, helps them travel to get there, and then in sort of a communal space, gives them tools for self-care and for empowerment. I think we tend to think of self-care as a pretty individual action, even when we're sort of thinking about the community or like wanting to refresh ourselves to go fight in the community. Or, like Neil mentioned in the beginning about, like with the Black Panther movement and trying to have more collective ideas of what healthcare could look like or how to provide childcare for each other. There is some of that, but I think that, sort of collective building around how to take care of yourself as an individual, I'm sorry, my child is pretending to be a puppy in the background, is really kind of a nice framework for thinking about it. That I don't know so much about here, right? Like we go on individual retreats or we go on retreats where we have mindful practice and so we're quiet the whole time. And like those are really great. That works with sort of our sensibilities. But in the Americas, just having more of a collective space where the women are going to actually meet each other and learn from each other, I think is a good example.
Okay, so this will be our last question of the evening. We were wondering if you all incorporated self-care into your teaching methods, and if you do, how do you do it?
If you don't mind, I will go first again because my puppy has run, my child puppy has run down the stairs, and so I'm going to try to get this in. I do, particularly, I do check-ins with my students, and that really started happening during the pandemic when we were online, and we would either, you could just like type in how you're feeling today or something like that. But then I would build in what I called moments of Zen. And so we just have this like 5-minute break where there'd be like a breathing module that they could like just practice doing the breathing and go to the restroom and grab a drink or like whatever. But like I was just trying to put those in. And then since we've come back to in person, I still think it's really important to check in with folks and just to get a sense of how everyone in the room is feeling. And so I'll do like either one word check-ins, or on a scale of 1 to 5, how's everybody feeling today? Or what did you eat for breakfast this morning? Because that tells me so much about if they're taking care of themselves or not when they're in a 2 o'clock class with me. And like many of them are like, I've had coffee today. It's like, okay, I don't want to put my mom hat on, but like, this is bringing attention to, you know, the fact that you're not taking care of yourselves. So checking in with students is definitely something that I've incorporated in. I've also, after, you know, having a few times where when I asked everyone how they were doing on a scale of 1 to 5, and most of the folks said 1, or everyone is totally exhausted or burnt out, I'll build in I call it a mental health day. And it's like, you know what, we're going to finish what we're doing today, and then we're not going to work on Thursday. And read, get caught up on any work that you need to for my class. I'm available if you want to talk to me about anything. Otherwise, it's okay to go for a walk, and, you know, we'll meet again next week. And then also just trying to have flexible deadlines as best I can throughout the semester, because nobody wants something that was written at 2 a.m. on no sleep and tons of caffeine and turned in at the last second. And I mean, that's not doing anybody any favor. So those are 3 ways I can think of that I try to bring it in.
I think Michael shared a little bit how he does it. I do some of those same things, Stephanie, and I definitely have. I do think that the pandemic has brought into sharp relief some things that I probably should have been doing already. Hi. Oh, that's so fun. Hi. Which is awesome in terms of like how the pandemic brings our pets and our personal lives and our whole selves, like right, our kids and everything into the screen. I'm a big believer in that, right? I don't have a lot of boundaries. Anyone who's had a class with me knows that I tell way too many stories on myself that nobody wants to hear. But I think telling the truth about who we are and where we are, I'm a big believer in authenticity, honestly. So sometimes part of what I've done is just tell them when I'm in a bad place and try to model for them that they have permission to tell the truth about where they are too.
So I think the same thing. Like, I think one of the things is show your scars, show your flaws, and let them know, like, you know, show your struggles and how you, and I've tried to relay it, especially in my GC2Y. We talk a lot about those things, and I'll let them know my failures and all the ways that I messed up and things that I would have done to let them know that, you know, I wish I would have started some of this self-care, some of the things I'm telling into you, I do it because I want you to do a better job than I did when I was your age. I want you to be a much better human than I am, you know, and I want you to, you know, care about yourself more and take care of yourself more. You know, maybe you're supposed to be the one to cure cancer. Maybe you're supposed to be the one to do, you know, to change everything. And you can't, you know, if you're constantly fried all the time and the only thing keeping you awake is caffeine, you know, you're just gonna be a big ball of adrenal fatigue, you know, you're never gonna get anything done. Then you're gonna question yourself and, you know, anyway, yeah. And so, yeah, so I try to incorporate that with being like, you know, very transparent with who I am and giving them stories and incorporating a lot of, you know, books or various things into the class where they have, you know, instantiated examples of things. It's not just Mr. Hobbs running at the mouth. So.
All right. Thank you guys so much for answering all of our questions and to the questions we had for the Q&A session. To all of our panelists, Ms. Opperman, Mr. Hobbs, and Dr. McClure, thank you guys so much for participating and dealing with all of my emails. You guys are all amazing. And we wanted to thank Jennifer and Melissa with the Women's Center, as well as Professor Sevcik, our GC2Y professor, and for helping us during this entire presentation. And we hope to see everybody tomorrow for Group 2's event, GC Me Too, from 4 to 5 p.m. and ANS 270. Again, thank you guys for everything.
Thank you, Abigail.
Of course.